From killing entire families for fun to creating a cannibal town, the world has seen a crazy range of bloodthirsty characters. And this is a list of the worst psycho killers in history, with S tier being the worst. This is John Wayne Gacy. He grew up with a terrible father who slapped him around for being a quote-unquote sissy son. But he didn't let that experience define him. In fact, for most of the 1970s in Chicago, John was the nicest dude in his neighborhood. So nobody suspected this obese guy who played Pogo the Clown at hospitals, children's parties, and political rallies had an unfunny private life. It was probably funny to him, but the boys and young men he drugged, raped, and murdered definitely weren't laughing. As a kid, he once shared a cozy coffin with a dead boy, and that was when he developed his weird thing for dead young men.
Do you mind if I join you in there? I'll take that as a yes. You won't tell anyone about this, right? Your secret is safe with me.
But as he grew older, he became a closeted gay man until he fought his way out of that dark space. His first wife had to leave him after he went to prison for forcing one of his swinger friend's sons to suck him off. But he played the bright, jolly fellow like a pro, so 2 years later, he was out of the can on good behavior. And when his parole ended, he got a place in Norwood Park in Chicago where he became the daytime clown and nighttime killer. Here, John would promise young men a job or some other benefit to lure them to his home, but instead of an employment contract, he would pump them full of alcohol. Then, with all of his massive weight, he would choke them by sitting on their face while he had his member in their mouth. And when he wasn't substituting their oxygen for ass gas, he was drowning, strangling, and reviving them or doing some other deranged shit he needed to climax. He tortured them like this until they eventually died. Then he simply dug up a spot in the space under his house, threw them in the pit, and covered their corpse with concrete. But he soon used up that storage space and started dropping the bodies in a local river. And he would have continued his sadistic game for longer if his 33rd victim's mom wasn't so nosy. She knew he was the last person to see her son, so she led the police to him, and investigations soon revealed the sicko behind the clown makeup. Before his execution in 1994, this monster ordered a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken and told the world, "Kiss my ass." Now, that was a serious threat, knowing nobody tasted John's murderous butthole and lived to say it was finger-licking good. B tier. Meet Pedro Lopez. Pedro became a street kid after his mom kicked him out of the house for fondling his younger sister, but this only made him an even touchier maniac. Out on the streets of Bogota, he was serially molested and he didn't like it. So when he landed in prison for car theft and some fools molested him again, he slit their throats. But during his 9 years in prison, the cutthroat had grown a hatred toward his mother and women in general. So when he got out, he left Colombia for Peru to become the monster of the Andes among the indigenous Ayacucho people. The mad dog went after innocent-looking 9 to 12-year-old girls and lured them away from their tribe with the promise of a gift. But the real prize of following Pedro was the last thing those girls would have wanted. When they arrived at the secluded spot, the girl's grave was already waiting. Then he would cuddle her until sunrise. And as the sun came up, he would her before strangling her to death. Then he'd defile her corpse and drop it in the grave. According to him, he had slain at least 100 girls by the time the Ayacucho people caught him kidnapping a 9-year-old girl. But instead of handing him over to the police, the jungle men stripped him, buried him up to his neck, and poured syrup on his naked head. They were waiting for the ants to start feasting on him when some righteous Karen showed up. This female missionary persuaded the Ayacuchos to release Pedro to her and promised to deliver him to the police. But as they did, you just know the ants were losing their shit. Who the fuck is that? Some preacher, I think. So why's she taking our food away? Maybe she wants to eat him alone? That's so selfish. Hey, woman, give us the head and keep the rest of the body. We just received a lot of refugees from the next village. They could use some of that meat. You greedy human eater. Whether Pedro escaped from the woman or the police is unknown, but he knew his cover was blown in Peru, so he started operating between Colombia and Ecuador. And wherever he went, girls disappeared. At first, the Ecuadorians thought human traffickers were responsible for their missing girls. But after a flash flood revealed the bodies of 4 girls, the authorities smelled a killer among them. So they caught Pedro while he was taking another 10-year-old girl to her death. And after they got him to confess, he took them to the mass grave of 53 girls. So for the murder of 110 girls, Pedro got Ecuador's maximum sentence. But that was only 16 years, and being the stand-up guy he was, he got out 2 years early on good behavior. Then he was deported to Colombia, but the government there couldn't try him because they weren't sure he was all right in the head. So they let him go, and ever since, the world hasn't heard from this killer who claimed the lives of over 300 girls. So the question is, when last did you check your basement? Just pulling your leg to the basement where Pedro's been living for the past 5 years. Okay, that's the last one. He's actually up here on A tier. Well, just so you know, Pedro is the name to avoid on dating apps. Pedro Rodriguez Filo was from a different breed of killers. Think Batman, but with an insane killing streak. At age 14, the deputy mayor of Pedro's town fired his father from his job. So he picked up his father's shotgun, went to the town hall, and unalived the man. Then he killed the school security guard who accused him of stealing food. Then he shot the security guard he suspected was actually stealing the food. So the trick was not to take his stuff or accuse him of taking stuff. He eventually ran away from home because he'd become some kind of criminal. But did he stop killing? Of course not. He found a nice paying job robbing and killing the drug dealers around his hideout. And it was at this point he became Pedrino Matador. But when one of those drug gangs tried to get back at him, they killed his pregnant girlfriend instead. So Pedro activated Rambo mode and killed every member of this gang. Who killed my girl? I don't know, I swear, I'm just a water boy. He was caught and jailed for those killings, and on his way to prison in 1973, he slit the throat of the rapist sitting beside him in the police car. This guy had a tattoo that said, "Mato por prazer," or "I kill for pleasure." So the rapist should have gotten the memo. Pedro was excited to know his father was in the same prison with him, and once inside, he found a way to reach his old man's cell and stabbed the old man 22 times. Then he cut out his heart and took a bite from it. He'd been waiting to do that since the idiot hacked his mother to death with a machete. And if he could do his old man like that, everybody else was fair game. So he ended up killing 47 inmates he thought deserved to die. This increased his 128-year sentence to 400. But since Brazil's maximum sentence was only 30 years at the time, he only got 4 years more for the extra lives he took. He got out and went back in for another 7 years for some minor crimes, and when he returned outside for the last time, he opened a YouTube channel to preach the gospel of nonviolence. But there was a long line of gangs that surely weren't subscribed to his channel. The fact is, after Pedro killed 71 people, there were quite a number of groups interested in his death. So, on March 5th, 2023, a gang slashed his throat and shot him multiple times. For real though, it's crazy to think this killer spent 68 years on Earth with the kind of life he lived. D tier. After Yang Shinhei dropped out of school at age 17, he moved from one Chinese province to another doing odd jobs, but soon he would leave job hunting for head hunting. At first, it was less violent crimes like the theft and attempted that got him some years behind bars. But when he was released for the final time in 1999, his girlfriend left him. And this breakup flipped a switch in Yang's head. He went from love to bloodlust like that, and unleashed chaos on the Chinese countryside. He 23 women and killed 67 people in a calculated spree that lasted 2 years. He sometimes used axes and shovels, but his murder weapon of choice was a brand new iron hammer. He liked how it felt in his hands, and he cracked most of his victims' skulls and even left holes in some heads with it. On some of his rampages, he killed entire families and raped female members that caught his eye. And as he escaped the crime scene, he buried his weapon and discarded his blood-soaked clothes. He even intentionally wore oversized shoes to throw the police off his trail. So, although he wasn't the brightest in the school, he sure had killer instincts. And for a while there, Bigfoot was a prime suspect. But in 2003, Chinese police caught Yang during a routine check of the bar he was drinking in. He was giving off a strong, "I have done some serious shit" vibe, so they arrested him.
Hey officer, you looking for a guy who may or may not have killed a lot of people in the countryside? He's about this tall and likes mahjong. I know he looks a lot like me. The bastard even uses my name, but I swear I'm him. I'm not him. How do words work again?
I don't know, but everything you just said will sure as be used against you in the court of law. What an idiot. In little time, the police connected him to his heinous crimes that spanned 4 provinces. And just to get a sense of this guy's broken mind, this was what he said while in police custody. "When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is none of my concern. I have no desire to be part of society. Society is not my concern." Thankfully, the Chinese government saved society from this psycho when a firing squad killed him in 2004. C tier. In his own words, Andrei Chikatilo called himself a mistake of nature and a mad beast. He was born into harsh times like most Ukrainian kids who lived through the time before and after World War II. But besides the hardship, he was a bully magnet. He was socially awkward, his father surrendered to the Germans. At age 15, he ejaculated during a tussle with a younger girl. You know, all the stuff mean kids use to get their victims. That ejaculation episode marked the beginning of his public struggle with sex. And word spread quickly that Andrei was a dud and not a dude. So his hunk rating dropped faster than the appetite of a guy who has to eat a raw octopus sandwich. Still, he managed to make something of himself by finishing military service and studying Russian literature. But he was later fired from teaching that subject because he couldn't take his hands off his students. And even though his sister had found him a wife and he had 2 kids, he still felt sexually inadequate. So he started lurking around train stations and bus stops where he picked up mostly young girls, but he dabbled in boys once in a while. He would take his victims to secluded areas, but he couldn't rape them because of his inability to keep an erection. So he would stab them to death and fill their mouths with mud. He went even further to disembowel some of them and gouge their eyes out. Between 1978 and 1990, he was the most wanted man in Rostov Oblast in the Russian SFSR. And as the Rostov Ripper eluded the police, some unfortunate guy was executed for one of his crimes. But after killing his last victim, a police patrolman found Andrei moving suspiciously and arrested him. Then he spilled everything about the 56 murders he'd carried out, and the police confirmed 53 of them. In court, the judge ignored his unhinged shenanigans as signs of insanity. "Hey, my lord, take a look at my pee-pee. And behind it is the hole for my poo-poo. I still don't think you're cuckoo." And that's exactly why I'm sending you to your alien planet. And on Valentine's Day in 1994, this psychopath died from a single bullet to his head. B tier. Moses Sitoli was South Africa's worst nightmare. He and his siblings grew up in an orphanage after their mother bailed out on them following their father's death. Well, let's just say Moses didn't have the best orphanage experience. He was still a teenager when he was imprisoned for a he claimed he didn't commit, and when he left prison, he waged a war against all women younger than 19 or older than 45 years old. He lured them with a fake job interview for a fake charity and took them to an isolated area where he beat them unconscious and raped them before strangling them with their own underwear. There was also one unlucky toddler Moses killed before killing his mum. He hit the 2-year-old on the head with a blunt instrument and left him to die. And when he got bored between kills, he made prank calls to the victim's family for a healthy afternoon laugh. But as Moses moved from Atteridgeville to Boxburg and continued his killings in Cleveland, his alphabetical movement became obvious. And South Africans were scared shitless, especially the residents residents of Donutsburg, which is a made-up place, so don't bother Googling it. But in 1995, a victim was traced to Moses, and he ran away when he found out the police had discovered his history. Then, in hiding, he called a journalist and confessed to her that he'd killed 76 women and led the police to the whereabouts of one of the bodies. The judge let Moses know he'd have gotten the death penalty if it was still in use, but for his verified 38 murders, 40 rapes, and 6 robberies, he got 2,410 years in prison. And according to the judge, he'd have to spend 930 years of his sentence to be eligible for parole. If this menace isn't Methuselah, something says he won't be around long enough to make parole. C tier. Karl Denke lost everything to the economic depression of post-World War I Poland. He had to sell the house he bought with his inheritance, then he rented 2 rooms in that building and ran a shop close to his home. His neighbors in Zybko, which was a Polish border town under German rule, called him Papa Denke. They knew him as the lovely gentleman who played organs in church and sold leatherworks and pickled pork in his little shop. But back then, many people walked around without purpose. So at funerals, he saw these vagrants and offered them a place to stay before setting them on their way. But nobody noticed that at least 40 of them never made it out of Papa Denke's place. On December 21st, 1924, a man ran out of his apartment bleeding from the head from an axe cut. He claimed Papa Denke had attacked him with an axe, but Papa Denke denied the nonsense. "Help! The crazy old man just broke my effing head!" "Hey, Papa Denke would never do that. You damn liar! Tell them how you tried to kill me before I wrestled the axe from you. How could I have attacked you if I was sleeping?" "Yeah, you're a violent sleepwalker." "No, I'm not." "Yes, you are." "I'm not." "You are." "Not." "Are." Enough. But before midnight that day, 54-year-old Papa Denke hanged himself in his jail cell as any decent, bloodthirsty killer would do. After his mysterious suicide, the police got a warrant to search his apartment on Christmas Eve. And immediately upon opening his door, a strong stench of vinegar attacked their senses. But this wasn't just because he used vinegar to pickle his pork. In fact, they soon found out that Papa Denke had been playing totally different kinds of organs at home. They found the piles of human bones in his room and the shoelaces, suspenders, and belts he made from human skin still curing on a line. So the pickled pork had not been pork at all. This psycho had fed an entire town with human meat. And you can imagine how his biggest customers must have retched their guts out after knowing the source of that sweet but funny-tasting pork they loved so much. E tier. When Jeffrey Dahmer's family lived in Milwaukee, he was just the weird kid who collected animal carcasses and enjoyed the crackling of bones. But after his family moved to Bath Township in Akron, Ohio, Jeffrey became reclusive and started chugging alcohol in high school. This was also when he discovered he was into men and began fantasizing about dominating other men. After high school, his parents divorced. His brother went to live with his dad, and his mom left him at home alone a lot. So one day he invited a hitchhiker into his home for some beer and music. But Jeffrey got pissed when the guy tried to leave him for some stupid concert, so he cracked his skull with a dumbbell and strangled him to death. Then he on his dead body before surgically dissecting him to crush his bones into powder and dissolve his flesh in acid. This would become his favored disposal method, but he wouldn't kill again for a while. His alcoholism made him flunk out of college and cut his military service short. So he returned to Milwaukee to live with his grandmother. Then he started frequenting gay bars where he found his prey and lured them to his grandmother's house to and murder them. After 3 kills, his grandma's place got too small for his 6 schemes, so he got his own place and created what can only be described as a terror den. Now, he didn't just kill and his victims, he ate them too. But on July 22nd, 1991, Jeffrey took a guy named Tracy Edwards home with his usual bait. He promised to pay Tracy to pose nude for him, but this was what actually happened. Why do we need the handcuffs? 'Cause I like my meat all cuffed up. I thought this was just gonna be a photo shoot. Yeah, we'll do that. After I eat your heart. Do you mean that literally or figuratively? I mean it for real-tively. Once Tracy knew what was going on, he played it cool with Jeffrey. And when the kooky killer wasn't watching, he punched him in the head, ran the F out of the house, and stopped a police car on the road. The first thing the police found were Jeffrey's sick pictures of his victims' body parts. Then they found some hearts in his fridge and his murder tools, which included a 57-gallon drum he used for dissolving bodies. They also saw his collection of well-preserved heads and painted skulls. Everything was so well arranged that someone described the house as Jeffrey's museum. At the time of his arrest, Jeffrey had killed 17 young men and boys. And with the mountain of evidence against him, he was condemned to live the rest of his life in prison. But inside those walls, he became obsessed with the idea of killing himself. So when a fellow inmate clubbed him to death with a metal bar in the prison bathroom, he just lay there and let it happen. You're probably thinking this nut job should be somewhere in hell right now, but he's here on S tier.